Hi. We're going to talk quickly about setting. I believe this is for week 5. So I just have a few things that I want to talk about. I don't have a PowerPoint for this. I don't have um, any demonstrations or anything like that to show you. I just want to talk with you about setting and how we create worlds and places that our reader will go with us, where that willing suspension of belief will come into play. So, the first thing that I want to talk to you about is write about what's familiar to you. So, my novel, A Kiss in the Rain, is loosely set in McAlester, Oklahoma. That's where I grew up. I'm very familiar with that town. I know the ins and the outs of it. I know where the big old buildings are. I know where the grocery stores are. Like I know where the hospital is, the prison, all of those things. And I know about some of those items in town that are no longer there. And so the history of the town, all of that comes into play in a town called Monroe. Well, I know it's McAlester, but my reader isn't going to know it's McAlester. But I drew on my ability to create description from my own wealth of knowledge of my hometown. So, um, when it comes to setting, and I mean, you're going to read from K.M. Weiland and from Stephen King this week and from Chuck Wendig. So everybody's going to have different things to say. But my experience is write about what you can describe. So for me, I really love to stick to things that I know, stick to places that I've been. I can describe what it is to stand on the edge of the Grand Canyon and the snow starts to fall. I've been there. I've experienced that. I can describe walking down the strip in Las Vegas. I've been there. I've experienced that. I can describe standing in Yosemite and watching the beautiful waterfall. I've been there twice. I can describe that. I grew up on Lake Eufaula. I can describe the Big Muddy and how maybe twice a year it actually looks blue, right? Most of the time it's brown. I can describe things that I'm familiar with, but that doesn't mean you have to name it the thing that you're familiar with it being. It means that you can take bits and pieces and create something new. But use your ability to use your senses to describe things that you've experienced or things that you know so that you can use that information to fuel the creation of whatever city it is that you're trying to describe, or castle, or home, or valley, or mountain, or car. Right? I've been in multiple cars. I know what it is to have on a big floofy prom dress and get into a little bitty MG convertible car. I can describe that setting. I can describe what it was to be in that car with my dress up around my face and my head barely above, like just barely below the windshield. So for me, I like to make sure that I can actually legitimately describe things. Now, what about a scene or a place I've never been? And I need that to be in my story. Well, that happened with For Love of Words. For some reason, and I don't know why, I couldn't tell you why, and I wrote the story. It needed to be set in Pennsylvania. Now, I've never been to Pennsylvania. I don't know anything really about Pennsylvania. But what I did was I got online and I read a lot. I read descriptions of parts of Pennsylvania, specifically like the small town area that I was trying to describe, and I looked up a lot of pictures. And I spent time with those pictures, and I felt what it would be like to be in those pictures. And I worked on being able to craft those scenes in a way that felt authentic. Now, when I was working on that, I needed my character to go on a walk in the woods. I needed Allison to go on a walk in the woods. And obviously had never been to Pennsylvania or in the woods, but I have a friend who in the middle of Missouri has an 80-acre piece of property. And so I went out there one weekend and I took the time to just sit and listen. Listen to the birds. Listen to the wind. Listen to the sound of the trees. Listen to the pine needles and the different kinds of things crunching under my feet. And so I wrote, I had my journal out, I had a pencil, I wrote all these things down. And when I came back, I was able to then pick up with my manuscript and really better fuel that scene with actual experience, having been in the woods. Now, I looked up birds that are familiar to a Pennsylvania forest area as opposed to middle of Missouri forest area. And I even was able to look up the sound of particular birds in Pennsylvania. And so I listened to those online so that I could effectively describe the sound of those birds. Now, I experienced the birds in Missouri, so I knew at what points those would be good to happen in the manuscript. But then I went to the internet and I experienced the sounds of Pennsylvania birds so that I was able to then add that to the experience. So perhaps it gets a little bit complicated, but not really. We just need to be able to marry our experience with new experience. However, we can grab that experience. The internet is a vast wonderland of noises and experiences and places and pictures and videos that you can watch. Now I have a manuscript that I've never had finished. I've never finished, and I have never had obviously published because it's not finished, but it's tentatively titled Whatever Happened to John. But there's a scene in the portion of the manuscript that is written where there's a horrific race car crash. And in order to be able to write that race car crash, a NASCAR race car crash, I looked up online, I looked up multiple car wrecks that occurred on raceways. And I found a particular one that felt like what I wanted to describe, and I watched it over and over and over. I listened to the sounds, I took notes. I listened to the crowd, I took notes. I watched it, I paused it, I described what I saw, and I was able to craft a scene that makes me cry because I know who's in the car. So we have to write settings from experience. And there's multiple ways. Like I said, there's multiple ways to get that experience. And so that's what I want to challenge you to do. Go new places, have adventures, go online, go on Google Earth, like study places, study new things. Go to places in Tulsa, go to places in around our area that are new to you and experience them. Spend time there. Take a notebook, write down what you hear, what you see, what you feel, what you taste, and what you touch. We need to be able to create setting that causes our reader to be there with us. We are inviting them to experience this place with us. Now, in the description, I also included a little bit about the short story Bullet in the Brain. Oh my gosh, I love that short story. It's not in my Comp 2 curriculum right now. I may end up putting it back in, but I had to take it out for various reasons, and that doesn't matter right now. But more about length of time. But in that short story, it's incredible. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend that you pick that up. It's by Tobias Wolff. In that short story, there's a great description of a small town bank. Our main character is in line in a small town bank, and of course, you know, the teller in the line that you're in closes the window, right? And they go off and they're just like standing there talking to somebody else, and you're standing there getting mad. So that's what's going on. And robbers come into the bank, right? And I'm not going to give anything away by telling you this next little part because the title obviously is Bullet in the Brain, so you know something's going to go bad. But our main character is a book critic, and he's just jaded with life. And the robbers come in, and they're very cliche. And one of them sticks a gun to our main character, and his name is Anders. And that causes Anders to actually look up at the ceiling in a bank that he's always been familiar with, right? It just takes it for granted. When we become overly familiar with something, we don't look at it anymore, right? And so he's looking at this ceiling and he describes the painted scene of like Olympic gods, except that the gods are all portrayed by cows and bulls, and he's seeing it and he's thinking this is ridiculous, but it's described in such a quirky kind of almost beautiful way, very sardonic, very but extremely descriptive. It's a lot of fun. And then he gets shot. And what happens with the rest of the short story, which I won't tell you about, is the bullet's going through his brain. And he gives some extremely excellent scientific information, which I thoroughly appreciated as a reader. Some scientific information about how a bullet crashes through the brain, and that the bullet then came under brain time. And so Anders has time to think. And um, so the rest of the short story, we're in his brain. Ah, you talk about a setting. What? Right? And every now and then you're reminded by the author the bullet continues to go, and you're just like, oh, that's right, I'm in his brain, right? And so setting can be so many different things. Setting could be perhaps being stuck in a box, right? Like I got this little box of ink here, right, that I ordered, and perhaps I could be like shrunk in size and stuck inside this box. That could become a setting. What would that be like to be stuck inside of a box? Well, maybe in order to be able to describe that, you need to go shut yourself in a room and turn off the lights and experience what it is to not be able to get out. I mean, we need to be able to experience the places that we want to write about so that we can bring our audience, bring our reader along for the ride. Isn't that fun? I think that's so cool. So I don't have a whole lot more to say about setting because there's going to be a lot you're going to glean and gain, especially from Chuck Wendig and Stephen King, and the K.M. Weiland book too. I know it's good as well. So you've got a lot of great information coming at you this week. Sit back, enjoy the read. Always be reading with a pen in your hand. Mark things, highlight, underline, put questions in the margin, put stars all over. I love to mark all over my books. It helps me retain information, and so that's what I do. I highly recommend everybody else does it too. With that being said, though, setting. Oh, and our assignment this week, our discussion thread, writing project. Don't want to forget this. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to do a form of describing our setting. I'm not going to say much more than that, but yeah, you do hear me giggling. So you're going to be like, oh, what's she going to make us do? You got colored pencils? With that, I'm going to let you go. And text me if you have any questions, 918-994-2324, or post your questions in the water cooler. Thank you very much.